Okay, good evening. Let me call to order the Concord Township Zoning Commission meeting of Tuesday, August the 2nd. Heather, if you could call the roll.
Yes, I will. Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Schindler?
Here.
Mr. Reppert?
Here.
Mr. Lingenfelter?
Here.
And Mr. Eiffelise?
Here. Thank you, Heather. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes from July the 5th, 2022.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we approve the minutes of the July 5th, 2022 meeting as written.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
I second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have some questions. On page 12, did we make any contact with the property owner about rezoning to R1?
No, we didn't.
No,
No,
not yet.
yeah.
Okay.
But although he does have some farming going on over there now, if you've noticed.
Yeah, you said
he's
he-
planted some crops.
Planets. Okay.
So,
Like corn.
and he did cut some trees that were around the house that sits on the 2-acre piece that's adjacent to the 10-acre piece we've been discussing. So, but, no.
Then on page 13, we said it's not proceduralized that we do make contact before we rezone something. And personally, I think it should be proceduralized. So I think maybe we can discuss that at a later date.
Okay, thank you, Harm. Anything else?
Oh, yeah. Page, okay, that's, again, on page 18, line 11. Page 18, line 11. What is CAUV?
That's a designation for a property for agricultural use.
Okay. Can we define it in here? Is it defined in our zoning?
Yeah, Heather, please.
CAUV is, it's a tax break basically that the Lake County auditor, they are the ones that processes those applications, and I think it comes from the, but current agricultural use valuation. So if you do so much farming and have so much income generated from farming on your property on an annual basis, you can submit an application to the county that will reduce your property taxes.
Okay.
So you're not paying the full value. But I don't think that's a term that we should define in the zoning resolution, because it's not something that we regulate.
I just thought maybe
Or the minutes.
CAUV parenthesis blah, 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 blah.
I don't think we were proposing to add that in or into the text
Yeah.
or anything.
If I may, I think Hiram is suggesting that we spell it out in the minutes, just to understand what it,
Okay.
That's all
Yes.
I'm saying.
I believe that's
I'm
all he
sorry.
said.
I really didn't know
Yes.
what it was.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I would think that's appropriate to add, if we could.
Heather talked to trustees on major revisions, and you just talked to us about it, okay? Well, I guess we did, okay.
Just for the record, Hiram, that stands for current agricultural use value.
Okay.
That's what that means. That's what CAUV means, just so you know.
And then I think we'll be going over some of the changes that we have to the major issues. Are we going to be discussing major changes versus minor changes tonight? I thought that was one of our assignments to do.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
we will be discussing that tonight.
On the agenda.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all.
Okay, thank you, Hiram.
There were just questions, no corrections.
Other than the
CAU.
defining CAUV, I think that's appropriate. So let's add that to the minutes. I think we had a motion and a second for approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes stand approved. Thank you. Let's move on to correspondence. I'll ask each member for any appropriate correspondence received. I'll begin with Frank, please.
None, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Hiram?
None, Mr. Chairman.
I have nothing to report. Andy?
Nothing.
And Rich?
Nothing, Mr. Chairman.
It's all quiet in the middle of the summer.
Slow month. Yeah.
Slow month. Thank you, members. Our next order of business is public participation. As a slow month, yes, we have nobody present here physically and no one on the phone. So under new business, we have nothing, so we'll move fairly quickly to old business. And these are work sessions that were initiated last month. And now we have further homework to do. But we did ask Heather, and thank you, Heather, for putting together the documents for us. We asked her to draft the amendments as we were not ready to make any real formal decision on THN district, but wanted to have something as an amendment in front of us. So what Heather has done is provided us with a couple things. First of all, the uses to compare town hall neighborhood with R1, which is the consideration we have before us. It's conversion of town hall neighborhood to R1, so that we can see the difference in the uses under each district zoning. So that side-by-side comparison is here in front of us to review. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at it. There are, from what I gather, if anybody has an objection, there's not a whole lot of overlap, commonality between the two, from what I can tell.
I don't know. I have highlighted on THN 4 and over to R1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 4 to 6 are basically the same.
Can you indicate what those are?
Okay, on THN, child or adult daycare, residential care facility, hospice care facility, and government and public uses. Those 4 are not identical, but in most cases, very similar to adult family home on the top, adult group home, I don't know what the difference is, but be that as it may. Government and public uses further down the line, home for the aging, I said that was similar, hospice care facility, and residential care facility pretty much met the same idea that was on the left side. So, now of course R1 is much bigger with the uses, but so that was my review between the two.
Thank you, Harm. I would agree with that. Those that are similar in both districts. I think what we discussed to kind of trigger some conversation or discussion, where there were several points made last month, and I had jotted down some notes about them relative to the initial preference the board had regarding the elimination of the remaining THN, and that was a couple points. One of them was the recommendation from the Lake County Planning Commission to remove the THN and convert it to R1. There was a point that Heather raised regarding the dimensional standards related to THN and the way the configuration of the property lend itself to inability to split lots, if I recall, dimensional standards. And the other was that R1 would be consistent with the zoning that's in the area. And then relative to the discussion with the property owner, if we so choose to recommend a rezoning of the property, we had discussed at least advising as a courtesy, but certainly the property owner has the right to come to public meeting and voice an opinion relative to the change in zoning. Those are my, I'm sorry, the other one was the site topography was very restrictive to the THN development and some of the water resources that lie on the property. And with side-by-side comparison with those points, I guess I would open up for discussion of further review now that you're seeing the side-by-side comparison and some of the points we made last month. Is there any thought process over the last few weeks that would alter our opinion from what we now see in front of us?
My thought is that changing times have obsoleted the need for this, and as we mentioned, there's one little island of property that consists of the whole zoning of that category, so I see no real need to keep that alive, personally.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Andy?
No, I think it's important to note that the uses that Hiram brought up in the town hall neighborhood versus the R1 is that in the R1, those are allowed uses.
Right.
And in the town hall neighborhood, they're all conditional uses. Even though they're the same, they're still conditional versus being allowed. So I think that's an important point. So if we convert it to R1 and they decide to put in any of those uses that are in the town hall, they just do it. There's no consideration, where with the town hall, there's at least there's conditions that have to be met in order to put them in. So it gives us a little bit more control. How important is that control? I don't know. Is it important to control those things? I don't know. But I just think it's important to point that out, that the conditional uses are, they're conditional uses versus, and maybe that should prompt a conversation as to, do we want to make any changes on existing uses in R1 and turn them into conditional uses, or just leave them as allowed? That's another topic for another day, but but it's still, I think it warrants some consideration, because there are some uses that maybe, do we want to just allow them, or do we want to have them be conditional uses so that we at least have some ability to guide the process? Just a thought.
And excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have to interrupt.
Please, no, go ahead.
I made an error on this table now that you brought up the fact that I listed these not as conditionally permitted. I'm looking at the zoning resolution and the actual, in my haste of going on vacation and coming back, it looks like I did not proof this. So I want to make a correction to this review list under the R1. Some of these uses that are listed here actually are conditionally permitted.
Oh, okay.
And I'm happy to go through them.
Good.
You can look at the resolution.
Yeah,
Sure.
as I'm telling you.
Because you did have some designated as conditional uses. So I just assumed that,
Yes, and I made a mistake.
Heather,
So-
and I was just going to compliment Andy on suggesting that we look at those uses in R1.
And I just looked at it and was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I did
Okay.
this.
Okay.
So if we look under the R1.
Yes.
Okay, so the camp is I think what happened is right after church, I stopped writing conditional uses. So the community center in an R1 is a conditional use. So is the community park and playground. The golf course is a permitted use.
Right.
So are the government and public uses. The home for the aging is conditional. So is the hospice care facility. As is the library and the museum and the neighborhood park.
Oh, wow.
The nursing home, the residential care, and the school and university. So again.
Oh, they're all
Wow.
Well, I appreciate that, Heather,
Yeah.
because quite frankly,
can-
when I looked at the list, I was taken aback by
Yeah.
the number of permitted uses in R1.
Right. That's what I
Yeah.
was thinking. Oh, wow.
Okay.
So I apologize again for
No
that,
worries.
but I'm glad we made the correction right now.
Thank you.
Heather, one error in a year is pretty
Permissible.
darn good. I've got to give
I'm
you
just glad
some.
we caught it early.
It's all right.
Okay. So,
That's good, though. That's good to know. Okay.
Okay.
So then I stand corrected. But it
But,
was Heather's fault.
Yeah, and that's fine, I'll take the blame, yes, for sure.
but thank you, Andy, duly noted about the conditional use on the town hall for those particular cases. Hiram, any other comments regarding the?
Well, I was on the planning commission meeting when we said, let's make it all R1. And I voted, yeah. And I still have that same opinion. Everything else around it is R1. This is a sore thumb sticking out there. Somebody might look at it and say, you were spot zoning, but this is a leftover.
Yeah.
So you can't say spot zoning. So, but I'm all for R1.
Thank you, Hiram. Frank?
No, I agree. Yeah, because I think, first of all, we're allowing the homeowners, for example, not to have to go through this whole process if we leave it the RH, you know? Every time they want to do something, they have to go for a permit, a conditional use permit. This way here, we're not being restricted. And I think in general, the home landowners would be more happy with it too. So I think it doesn't serve a purpose anymore, especially with the changes that have started to take place over the years. So I'm for removing it myself altogether.
Let me ask Heather as she checks for other errors. Perhaps. She's checking. Heather, no, seriously, any further input, feedback from your end as planning and zoning regarding these districts that might provide information for us to make the right decision?
Okay, well, I guess I just when looking at the uses from one district to the other, I guess consider, if we were to leave it town hall neighborhood, how would some of these uses fit with the residential now that's adjacent to it? So, or how, what we might be losing if we no longer have the ability to have maybe some of these commercial uses in this area. I mean, as we know, this was a larger area that was town hall neighborhood. So if we leave it town hall neighborhood and then we see a medical or dental office pop up on this site, what could the impacts be? Or what if we don't have the ability to have medical and dental at that site? And do we have other areas to accommodate those uses? So just consider some of the economics, I guess.
Didn't we say
Good point.
that some of these uses on either side would require sewer? And sewer is going to be a very hard thing to get, a very expensive item to get for this building, for this lot. So
Sewer's available, so Hireman, in my experience for any commercial development, for them to put a pump station and a force main in is cost of development. Is
yeah,
not that
well, yeah,
egregious.
but it's an additional cost.
as opposed to a gravity lab.
Right.
Sure. I thought it was important initially to discuss this before going through 11 amendments. Just a due diligence here, if we're, our thought process is to proceed in the manner which we talked about, that certainly seems compelling reasons to recommend change to R1, then we would at least provide some due diligence to all the recommendations on these amendments, which will embody the change. Right, Heather? So the 11 amendments would be
Correct.
the ones, yeah.
What would the homeowner do? Or the property owner do with this amendment? Would he have to plow down his cornfield?
No. I mean, the agricultural use, we can't regulate it whether the property is zoned town hall neighborhood or R1. And notification to the property owner would happen if the board does decide to move forward with the proposed amendment. So we would notify that property owner that we're looking at potentially rezoning it. Because by state law, we're required to. So we would notify him at that point, and he can come to the hearing and speak either for or against it, or ask questions and things like that. But as far as what he appears to be currently using the property for, this should not impact his agricultural use.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. If there's no objection from the board, I think it would be appropriate for us to step through the amendments here, at least do our due diligence to look at the recommendations from Heather on what's being proposed in each amendment. I think it's pretty evident, number one is the amendment to the zoning map. And she's provided that to us, indicating the parcel number and the change on the map. Any questions on number one? There being none, Amendment 2 is relative to Section 6, the general requirements, and I believe it's really just, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, just striking THN from the last sections here of Section 6.
Correct. There were several small sections that referenced
Okay, and
it.
THN.
Yep.
Unless I hear any question or objection, I'll just move on to amendment number 3, the site plan, zoning permit, section 11, which is again just striking THN actually in one location under 11.02.
It appears to me that's kind of the majority of this.
That's the, yes.
No,
You know, I would just- I mean, to
that's
me,
not
it's-
the majority, that's the total.
Right. It just
Okay.
appears to me that it's pretty much just
THN.
striking THN and
That's
town
it.
hall out of the,
And here and there and or.
right.
Yeah.
So Andy's making a good point. I was only going through the,
I don't want to steal your thunder.
No.
I mean, I don't, far be it from me to interfere with you. You are on a roll. I want you
But-
to continue on that roll.
You
I
know,
don't
the-
want to be the stumbling block
the
here.
roll reaches the bottom of the hill sometimes, and recognizing that they are all identical. If there's no objection from the board, unless,
You can't stop the chairman. You can only hope to continue.
that's not a legal
You tried.
comment. That was not a legal advice.
That was rock solid legal advice. I think that was rock solid legal advice.
Oh, no.
Is there any objection from the board to formally accept all the amendments, 1 through 11, as modified and informed from you?
No objection whatsoever.
No.
No, I look
I'm
through it
sorry.
like that.
I'm sorry. I am really sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
It's fine.
You were doing so well.
It's fine. It's fine.
I didn't mean
So formally, council, or perhaps Heather, do we need to formally approve them each?
Each.
Singularly?
Yes.
Yes?
I thought so.
I'm asking.
I would make a motion that we just accept amendments 1 through 11 as written and go from there.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? No. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Good job, Heather. No
Not
mistakes.
opposed.
Very nice work, Heather.
Amendments 1 through 11 stand approved.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman,
And
so I
recommended.
think procedurally, we need to decide then, does the zoning commission want to initiate the proposed map and text amendment? If so, then we would, we need to set a public hearing date
Set a public
for
hearing.
that. So, Mr. Lucas, do we need to we need to amend that motion, or are we okay with that?
No.
Or,
They've approved the amendments, now
Okay.
I should make a motion to have it scheduled for public hearing.
Okay,
Okay.
With the zoning amendments as initiated by the zoning commission.
okay.
Before we do that, is there any time constraint? We've got to propose that within the next,
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought so.
There is.
Yeah, it has to be within, let me just double check. Mike can also,
The clock starts to tick.
I want to say 30 days, but
Yep.
I should have known.
It has to be September 1.
Public hearing
You can entertain a motion.
shall be not less than 20 nor more than 40 days from the date
40,
we're
of,
good. Yeah, we're within the window.
so if we look at,
September 6th.
September 6th.
that would be our next meeting, does that, how many days is that? Yeah.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that would be 35 days from tonight if we did September 6th.
There we go.
So I'll entertain a motion
Mike, does that
for,
look
Yeah,
right to
that's,
you?
yes, that's pursuant to 8.05 of the zoning resolution. That's correct, 20 to 40.
Okay, thank you.
okay, entertain a motion to hold a public hearing on September the 6th, 2022 for amendments 1 through 11.
So moved.
Second.
I second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Unopposed? That stands approved. We will hold the public hearing September 6th, so I should say, 2022 for amendments 1 through 11 to remove THN district. Thank you, members. We're moving. Next item on our agenda is a work session to review section 16 PUD and RCD district. Heather has provided us with a significant revisions to section 16 for us, all red line to look over, and I probably will look to you, Heather, if you could please, to kind of take us through
Sure.
the recommended changes, please.
Okay, yes, Mr. Chairman. So, last month, we talked about, the board talked about possibly changing how the final development plan is approved and how major modifications are approved for RCD and PUD plans. These changes reflect a little bit more than that, because as I started looking at it, I felt like some of the order of, like specifically under section 16.14, where we start talking about the review process for the township final development plan. The order of this kind of stuff didn't make sense to me. So I kind of pulled out, I read straight through where we started talking about timeframes for plans expiring, because this didn't seem like the correct spot for me. So that's why that's kind of marked out. But I did show as a potential change that rather than the Board of Trustees reviewing the final development plan, that possibly that the Zoning Commission review that. And then the next section, under section B of section 16.14, I did propose a couple other small edits here. Under the items that must be submitted to the township for the final development plan. A developer had questioned me at one point during this process why the township needed the estimated cost of the entire phase for their PUD, and I didn't really have a good answer on that. I'm not really sure if that's something that the township really needs or finds necessary. So I was proposing that maybe we take that out. I know that when it is a major subdivision, they are required to provide figures to the county board of commissioners on their construction costs for their
improvements and things like that, but. I'm sorry, Heather, can you tell me where that?
Oh, I'm on 16.14B,
B.
number 6 under that.
6 is, oh, I see.
Do you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Just something that I didn't necessarily think was necessary. Obviously, it's been in there. We could just keep it. I might have gotten a little ahead of myself there on proposing to change some of these things. So I won't be offended if you're like, where's she coming from? Just moving on, I thought we should add in, again, just to kind of circle back on the work that we did under the RCDs where we require that environmental restoration plan to be submitted at the preliminary plan. I thought that that they should give us that final kind of environmental restoration plan and seasonal maintenance plan as well, if applicable to their project, just so we've got that submitted with the final plan and it's part of the final approval. And then number 8, I felt like as far as deleting that out, if we're going to shift this and go to the zoning commission on approving that, this really wouldn't be germane to how we would review that.
Agreed.
Same thing with like kind of C. I think because we do require the plat anyhow under B. And typically a condominium plat wouldn't be recorded until after the units are constructed. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to keep that in there or not. So I was suggesting that we take that out. And as I said in my email to you guys, I haven't gone over this with council either, so we'll definitely need legal to look at any of these
Sure.
proposed changes and make sure that everything we're potentially proposing is good text. I also suggested adding in some further possible review criteria for this board. Should you be the board to review the final development plan, just to give some guidance on how you should approve that. This was some language that I kind of morphed from some other communities that have a similar, plan review process for PUDs. So what I'm suggesting here is that if the final development plan comes in front of the zoning commission for approval, obviously you have 3 choices. You can either approve it, modify it, or approve it with modifications basically, or deny the plan. But what is the basis of that? That should be that they've met all the requirements of the preliminary plan and they meet everything in the zoning resolution. And then also there's some items A through D here, that it's that it's consistent, that the phase, if it's a phase project, is consistent with the approved preliminary plan, and that any part of the PUD or RCD not being used for basically improved areas is going to be landscaped or improved and as required by this board, or left in its natural state if required, such as in an RCD. We want to make sure that the Lake County engineer is good with the street patterns and thoroughfares. So I'm suggesting adding that in, and then just a kind of a general statement that it's consistent with the intent and purpose of the resolution and helps promote the public health, safety, and general welfare of the residents. And then, and I know we didn't talk about any of that last month, so I can understand if we need to digest that or look into more of those details further. And then as I said, I was striking out kind of this time limit extension stuff and kind of moving it into a different section that maybe would be added to section 1616. There's a little bit of renumbering because of some changes here, but I had proposed that maybe we add into the section that talked about modifications, the language on time limits and possible extensions to those time limits. Because right now, if the plan expires, they're supposed to go to a public hearing with the trustees, and there's kind of a process fleshed out on that. But this, I think, might provide better guidance to the township as far as if we need to ever go down this route. It seems like a lot of the recent PUDs and the RCDs have been approved in the last several years. We've not had to worry about expiring plans or anything. The only one we've really had to worry about expiring was like the original PUD of Quail Hollow, and that is the one that took so long, but it's likely we could have another development that large that could be spread out over several years, so.
You have a
Now-
question, Heather.
yeah.
Procedurally. This year I had the opportunity to be on the Board of Revisions for Lake County. And an issue that's come up a couple of different times in some cases that we've heard in some of the hearings, and it was not specific to Concord, but other communities surrounding us, where developments were done, and specifically as they dealt with open space and common areas within certain developments, where they were initially platted as a part of a phase, and then they didn't go back and finish the platting to designate it as open space or community space, whatever the designation was, and it was left as a part of a phase, a building phase. Because
Okay.
usually they come in with phases, right? When they do the building, they say this is going to be phase 1, this is going to be phase 2, this is going to be phase 3, and so on and so forth. Well, when you get into these multiple phases, there's been issues where there was community areas, there was open space, there was components that they never went back in and made the adjustment to designate it as open, when the plat was done and they moved on to the next phase, they didn't do the housekeeping to finish it off. And I was just curious, it's never come up with a Concord issue. But like I said, it's been Painesville Township, there's been some Menor, there's been other Madison, there's been several other communities that have had these issues with this open space or community space or shared space or whatever, and a lot of condo developments and things like that. But the question I have is do we make sure, do we have it set up so that we don't make those same mistakes? Because from a taxing standpoint, all of a sudden the residents are getting tax bills on parcels that were never converted over to the open space or or things that were designated otherwise. And so consequently the condo owners and some of the homeowners get stuck with paying taxes on these, and then they have to go and they have to file and make the changes on those to have them designated, because open space and things like that are taxed at a different rate than a regular, parcel would be, a permanent parcel ID would be. I was just curious if we've ever run into that, or if we make sure we have the steps in place to make sure that those things are taken care of before it's done, because these are things that happen, all of a sudden years go by, and now there's a phase that was done, and there was a big section of that phase that was supposed to be, open space, and it's still being taxed and it's still platted as a parcel,
Right.
and some of the parcels aren't really buildable.
Yeah.
Some of them are,
Yeah.
but they're saying, oh, well, nobody's ever going to build there because it would have. But I don't know about that. I wouldn't be so sure. If there's frontage and there's other issues that would make it accessible for development, I think you could be potentially leaving as the community. You could be leaving yourself open to somebody coming in, buying that property and slapping in more houses or doing something else with it. So I just was curious if we make sure that those things don't, if we have the right,
Well, I think we have.
procedures in place to not allow that to happen.
I think we have a procedure in place to do that, because and that is something that I look at very closely as these developments go through the actual subdivision review process. We get a couple of different bites at the apple to review the plat and make sure that the land is being dedicated on the plat as open space. So
Right.
when the plats get submitted to Lake County Planning for their initial review, they always send it to the community in which the subdivision is in, and our zoning office reviews it on behalf of the trustees. So if it's an RCD, I'm definitely looking at it very closely to make sure that it matches what was approved and that the language is on the cover sheet, designating it as open space and even deed restricting it from further development. Then as part of the final development plan review too, we do require that to be submitted. So the trustees also can see that as well before they vote to approve and sign it. We also send to our legal counsel, the review of the deed restrictions. So, does that kind of answer your question? I know that we do look at that stuff very closely to, can a mistake happen? Yes.
Well, these are over. I mean,
But,
these were
yeah.
obvious oversights, and
Yeah.
now, I mean, I'm sitting in a hearing, and there's an association manager, that's in attendance. There's an attorney from Columbus that's in attendance.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, it's a big to-do because these people, basically, the people that lived in this condo development were being double taxed because they were already paying, a share of the property taxes for the condo development, and then there was this other separate, fairly substantial chunk of property that was supposed to be community, owned by the community, but because it was designated as, I think it was phase 5, and it was, 20 acres, and it was being taxed at a regular tax rate instead of it being designated. They never, and when we actually went into the records and pulled the documents, and sure enough, it never got changed. And it was, and these people were basically getting double dipped on their taxes because of that. And they had to spend money to have an attorney come in, and they had to spend money on a property tax, a property manager to come in and represent them. And it was a pretty big issue. And I'm sure they spent a lot of money. And my question would be, was it really necessary? It's kind of a shame they had to do that. Was it necessary, or was this an oversight either by the builder when they were developing, that they didn't finish it off, that was it something in the township, where they missed something in the process and it didn't get, finalized or whatever, redesignated? I'm just curious. When I see that happen, it's like, okay, that's interesting. It was a big problem. I mean, it wouldn't be the township's problem, but it's the residents, and obviously, yes, they probably spent a lot of money to try to to get this thing fixed, and it probably, if they would have just done it the right way at the beginning, it would have never been an issue. So I just was curious if our checks and balances are in place to make sure that doesn't happen, for us. Or is there something we should consider doing, maybe another step in the process or another thing to make sure that those particular T's are crossed and I's are dotted before it, because next thing you know, 10 years later, like, oh, wow, geez, you guys have been spending all this money in property taxes you shouldn't have been. So, I don't know.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, Mike, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, I had
Share.
a question initially. So, Andy, when you're talking about open space, you're talking about open space that's been delineated for, let's say, a condominium association.
Right.
Without any ownership per se on it, other than it's just a clear open space.
Right.
As opposed to, and I know you're familiar with this, with Summerwood, where we had green space that was actually transcending across several private properties.
Correct.
You're talking about the former, correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, I don't disagree with you. I think that's true.
Well, it was interesting
there should be
because-
something, somewhere along the process that should have been delineated
Right.
out.
And they just I don't know whether it was overlooked, whether it was an administrative error, because if you looked at the plat, they had common area behind every condo. There was a strip of property, it was a strip of land that was specifically marked as common area. And you weren't allowed to put anything on it. You weren't allowed to, you couldn't put a shed on it. You couldn't put a fire pit in there. But it was a very narrow strip. But that abutted up against this big section of property of 20 acres.
So so this strip that you're talking about, who owns it?
Well, the condo association
Okay,
does.
and
Yeah.
the auditor's office reflects that?
Right.
Okay.
But then there was this big parcel behind that, and they thought that it was this big parcel behind that was all included, and it wasn't. It was its own.
Yeah,
It was kind of interesting.
it is interesting. I
Yeah.
agree with you.
I found
Somehow
it.
the auditor should be, and the treasurer should be notified of that.
Right. Well, and that's exactly right.
Which is why you're there doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, they should have caught that,
Right.
or had it brought to their attention, to
Right.
the better point, by the
And
township.
the people moved in, and you know how a lot of times condo developments or, are kind of transitory, people move in and out, they change. So it's not like, you're 2 or 3 in and somebody that's the third owner,
Yeah.
they're not going to know anything about any of that, but the bottom line, they're still getting
right.
hammered on the taxes
Yeah.
portion of it. They're still
And
paying
they're already
for it.
paying the common area expenses.
Right, plus exactly.
Yeah.
And it needed to be designated as common area or as open space. And the attorney was pretty good guy. He was very, and there was some specific cases in the Ohio Revised Code, and there had been some legal precedents that had been set about the open space and things like that, and how they need to be taxed and whatnot. But it still was an oversight. So it struck me as odd. And
No, that's a good point.
right.
I'll have to talk with Heather.
And while we're talking about, RCD
You and I will
and,
talk about
and resident, with the open space and green space and things like that, just, do we have the checks and balances or the administrative processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen, or that doesn't get overlooked,
Well, yeah, and I think there's a difference. There is a legal difference between open space within a condominium development and again, I use Summerwood,
Right,
where those green areas are on each individual properties along
Right.
Summerwood and that. So that's part of the individual property owners.
Right.
But that would have, because a lot of that is blocked out, especially in the rear yards.
right,
That should have an automatic reduction in valuation
right,
for the land, because a portion of that land, whatever the ratio is between the green space area and the total space area,
Right.
should reduce that.
well, and it's unimproved too.
Right, and it can't be improved.
And it can't be improved, right?
Right,
Can't put anything on it, can't put
Right.
any pavement on it, can't put a building on it, can't do anything to it,
right.
so.
It's like the neutral zone in Star Trek.
That raises a question with me. We're dealing with an RCD that's got 40 acres, 25 houses, whatever it is, and it's got a certain percentage of open space. Now, these are single-family homes with a lot size. That's what they're buying, isn't it? Just that lot? What's the taxes on the green space, on the open space? Who pays tax?
Homeowners Association, I would think, right?
Yeah.
I had that
It
exact
depends,
situation.
It's an
it
independent
depends
legal
where
entity.
it's at in the development phase, because if it's not fully developed, then the developer is paying the taxes on
Correct.
it. Because I've had a couple of developers that have come in and filed complaints, to the auditor's office for valuations on open space, because those lots were being taxed at a much higher rate, and they got caught up in this most recent triennial, and the taxes went up significantly on those lots of open space, and they were either undevelopable or they were landlocked. They had no access. There was no way they were going to be developed, and they were being taxed at a fairly significant level.
Okay.
So
okay.
yeah,
So once the entire area is developed, each lot is being taxed by itself, and then the HOA takes care of whatever they have to, maintaining the open space. And the HOA has to pay taxes on that open space.
Unimproved land.
On the unimproved land.
or they have to find an entity to come in, like a Western Reserve.
Oh, yeah, or somebody
Land
else to take
Conservancy
care
or
of it.
something like that to come in, or land bank or whatever, to come in and acquire that property, so then they would be responsible for it. But otherwise, somebody has to pay taxes on that property.
that
I mean,
open
there's-
space.
There's a tax liability, even though it's open space, it's undevelopable, it's not improved, there still is value to that property as far as the auditor is concerned, and it's got to be taxed.
It's
But at
relatively
what
low.
level does it
It's
get?
relatively low.
It is,
but still
if
have to pay.
if you make sure that it's designated.
Yes, right,
Okay.
right, exactly.
I understand.
So,
I understand.
yeah.
Okay, continue.
All right.
Nice discussion.
No, I just thought it was worth bringing up when we're talking about the green space and open space. It's just something that was interesting, so anyway.
That is interesting.
Well, with that being said, Andy, is this something we should be looking at in regards to what we're working on right now? Is there some verbiage we would have to put in or create?
Well, I think Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think what I would like to do is talk to Heather about this and find out the mechanics through the treasurer and the auditor's office, how they view that in terms of the mechanism for excluding that from valuations and that to individual property owners and that. So,
Well, I do know the auditor's office and the treasurer, they don't look at any property as being worthless. Or having zero value.
yeah,
You know,
unless it's owned by a
every
governmental
property has
entity.
value.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is important as to what value it is, and they have different grades and different, you know, designations for properties, and it has a direct impact on how it's taxed and how it's valued. So that's kind of important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that discussion. Mike, my only comment is, it seems to me there's something procedurally, regulatory wise. I mean, it depends on the filing of the plat, right? Bonding the improvements, not bonding the improvements. Did the developer?
Well, I
So-
think when you file the plat, you're designating on the plat the open areas.
The open areas, right?
And when the plat is filed, that should be the triggering device, in my opinion, for the
Yes.
treasurer and or auditor to note that within their, their tax assessments on the properties and that.
Yes.
It sounds like it seems to be skimming by from what Andy's saying.
Yeah, correct. And
But
I
it's
think
always,
Andy-
as you know, it's always on the plat.
It's always on the plat, and that's where I guess I
Yeah,
was concluding,
absolutely
but
right.
going back to Andy's question, it's always on the plat, it's not, I'm not thinking there's anything we can, protective clauses or whatnot that can be incorporated in a zoning code that,
No.
Yeah, it's
No,
just-
no, not at all.
Yeah.
The plat itself, as you noted, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
Is the protective device.
is the
for
protective
that.
device, right, right,
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Good discussion.
Yep. Thanks for letting me bring it up.
Heather, as you going through, when the extension, the 3 years, about the 3 years for the final and the preliminary plan, extension beyond the 3 years, 3 year.
Yeah.
Without referring it to, I'm thinking of R1, multiple phases of a single family. Is this any way consistent with that time frame? And I'm thinking of my own development, which is in phase 5 or 6, started like 20 years ago. I'm not asking the question right.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, can you read?
So, okay, so
What do you
in
mean
the,
these timeframes consistent?
you're adding an it's 3 years are, I'm sorry, that's on the extension beyond 3 years. Where in here do we say 3 years?
It's on 16.16.
Yeah,
Six-
16.16A. I was suggesting that we include
Ah,
in
there-
the
sorry.
preliminary. Yeah, sorry, the
That's what I was
preliminary
looking
plan.
for.
Do you see it?
That's what I was looking for. So
Oh,
that
okay.
shall become null and void unless construction, the final development plan, blah, blah, blah. If the final development plan consists of multiple phases of work, multiple phases of construction,
Okay.
how can we, are we saying 3 years? Again, I'll cite my own neighborhood. I mean, there are many phases that take years and years to develop. Is 3 years reasonable?
And maybe,
Or
do I mean the first phase of the?
Or each phase of the.
Yeah.
each phase?
Yes.
Yeah,
So if like the first phase of the preliminary, of the final development plan is not completed.
yeah, that,
Yeah, and actually it says that right here, I'm sorry. The preliminary plan shall become null and void within 3 years unless the final PUD or RCD plan for the first phase of the project has been approved by the zoning commission. And unless the final subdivision plat, when applicable, has been recorded. So that basically gives them from the day the town, like the trustees would approve the rezone, and then 30 days after it becomes effective,
okay.
then the clock would start ticking on 3 years for that developer to at least get their first phase of the plan approved by the county and by the township.
Okay, I read the second sentence, ignoring the
make
first one. Yeah, it does.
So
It
that
does.
gives them 3
I
years to
didn't-
basically do the first phase of the
And
entire
after that,
project.
there's no, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
After that, each subsequent phase isn't subject to the 3 years, correct?
I don't know, yeah. I would think not.
That's what
Hold
you're
on.
saying on
Yeah.
C and D.
Hold
That's-
on,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's how I read it.
Yeah.
That's how I read it.
Because otherwise,
Okay.
the
As long as the
final development
Right.
plan would be the entire, inclusive of all phases. And as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, the phasings go on.
Yeah.
I mean, Quail is a good example.
That's- yeah, big-
1986 on.
Right,
It's still phasing. Heather, you know what I'm saying though, on that?
Yeah, so it's only applicable to the first.
That's
the
how I-
first
that's how I
phase. Yeah,
read it,
there's
if that was
no,
your intent.
correct, yes, yeah.
Okay.
So the other subsequent phases would not expire because we're talking about the preliminary plan, right?
Yeah, we don't,
So,
yeah.
go ahead.
The final development plan gets salamied up into phases in that, but we want to make sure it doesn't lie fallow without any work done for 3 years.
Right,
Once the first phase begins, then the 3-year has been satisfied.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
You want anything to add, Heather, I think, in terms of overview
I
here?
guess I would just state that, that if just to explain, that in the event that nothing happens in the 3 years and that it's going to expire, and this might just be stating the obvious, but the applicant can come back to the township and ask for approval of the preliminary plan, should they want to, or if they've changed their mind, that the applicant and the property owner no longer want to move forward with that, they could initiate a zoning amendment to rezone the property to something else, which they could do at any time, really. And then, or lastly, if the township felt like, well, now we don't want to keep this PUD or RCD because the developer's not doing anything, maybe the township would want to initiate some kind of amendment to rezone the property to something else, which we always reserve the right to do anyway. But this does allow for, extensions to be granted by the trustees as well.
And of course, this is the item where we're suggesting we have approval, meaning the zoning commission, as opposed to the trustees, under 1614, correct?
Well, I think when we're talking about extensions and time limits, I mean, the way this is written, this goes to the trustees.
Oh, for extensions and time limits, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm talking
Yeah.
1614,
Oh,
where we strike the trustees.
right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, going back to that.
Kind of bringing that out as one of points of recommendation to the trustees that they may or may not be inclined to
Correct.
accept. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But the other item that we did talk about was, and if you keep going down under section 1616E modifications, and then actually F, if the modifications are classified as major, I've changed the reference, the sections to reference that the procedures would be followed in section 1613 and 1614, which basically would require the developer to go back then to this board to re-review the preliminary plan, or re-review
good.
the development plan. And this would, and Mike, can we clarify on this? These proposed modifications, because I didn't indicate, the modifications are to the final plan? Okay, so, okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay, so if there are major modifications to the final plan, then they would go back to the zoning commission to make a recommendation. And then
Which I think is what, one of the points that you mentioned, you wanted to have.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Right.
And we,
Because right now, it's my position that the preliminary plan is submitted, it's approved by the commission, and the final development plan, if there's major modifications, it has to be approved by the trustees, but it does not, under our current text, mandate a return to the zoning commission.
Correct.
And I know the members felt strongly that they wanted that done. I got it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heather. So under RCD, you're under 1629.
No, if we can, Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
go back to
Sorry.
item G.
Okay.
Proposed modifications shall be classified as minor or major. Do we consider the buffer that we talked about a change in use of character of the development? Does that include a buffer? Because we said last month that we wanted the buffer in there. And I don't see it in here, but it might be included as a change in the use or character of the development. Does that include the buffer or not?
Well, I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't think a buffer falls within a change of use.
Change of use.
It's not, it's just a feature of the use itself.
Yes, so I think Hiram's speaking to a modification from the preliminary to the final, where the buffer was to be one lot,
Or two
and then
lots.
it was gone. And
Oh,
the
yeah,
final-
that's a change.
That's a major change.
Yeah.
I agree with Hiram on that.
Me too.
What he's asking is whether that falls under the general terminology of what A says, use or character. I don't think so.
Yeah, I'd like, if we want that, I would rather prefer to see that fleshed out a little more in there.
I think that's a good
something
point,
that-
Hiram. And we were, I mean,
We were
R4 to
pretty adamant
R1
here.
to R4, and then
Yeah.
that was very disappointing on us that was eliminated.
So,
Put something in here
Heather, I would,
as
Heather can propose some language. Obviously,
new
this is,
G or
we're saying it's going to need some legal review.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue this work session undoubtedly. Yeah. So,
something,
And then if I could,
Please.
and maybe this is based upon what I've done before, major modifications shall include, this is number 1 under G, include changes to the approved plan that involve, as a minimum but not limited to, and then list A through G. Is that, I'm just used to seeing that.
yeah.
Yeah.
In all my
Yeah.
engineering stuff.
Yeah, not included. But
So
not
I don't know if that's
That
legit or
that
not.
might conflict with what we have in number 2 then, because then we say minor modifications shall include anything not classified as major.
Well,
So we might,
but maybe something comes up that,
Yeah.
you know, in your review, you think it's major, but it's not listed here.
is there a way to allow the zoning inspector some discretion on if they're not sure if it's major, minor,
Well-
or give the opportunity of the zoning inspector to have them bring it back to you for your blessing?
Absolutely,
I don't know.
at any time. Or at least bring it to your attention.
Well, any changes they have to bring to the
Yeah,
zoning inspector's
right.
attention, right?
Well, I mean, in reference to the major modifications, Hiram, and the mention specifically of the buffer, I mean, I think that if they were to eliminate the buffer and put in another lot, that affects the density. That's a major modification. If they eliminate the buffer and they put in a lot, that's a reduction of the approved open space. That's a major issue. So I think the
Well-
buffer is kind of covered on a couple of sides on that.
Well, that's
Right?
right. Those are good points, and then there's
Yeah.
another point too, that a development plan that has a buffer may be palatable to the immediately adjacent property owners.
Right.
And they indicate that for hypothetically in a public hearing, and then all of a sudden that buffer that was the sole reason that they're acceding to the development plan as presented is no longer there. I mean, suddenly the crowd turned ugly. So,
And they will.
they will. They have the ability.
Right, but I'm just saying, I know, to call, because your idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to specifically discuss a buffer, correct? Or to bring up, or
Yeah.
put buffer in this.
Between different zoning districts.
Right.
I mean, if they're same district, right?
But in my,
Well, it
in my
goes from
opinion,
an R-
the buffer's covered here because it specifically talks about the reduction of designated open space, and it also talks about increase in density. So if you take a buffer and you turn that into a lot, now you're building a house, that affects the density. So that's a major change. Or if they
does.
take that and just, let's say they move everything down to make room for lots somewhere else or do something else, and they encroach on that buffer, that's going to be a change in the approved open space, which also that sets a trigger as a major change. So do we need to specifically call it a buffer, or is it already adequately covered, I guess is my question.
That was my question. Is the buffer, the concept of a buffer included in, well, I said A, but it could be included in a number of them.
Right.
So we don't have to specifically call out a buffer as a major, change in a buffer is a major modification. It's already covered.
You could, I don't think, would it be redundant to throw it in there, Mike, or would it hurt?
Well, it wouldn't hurt, obviously.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt.
I agree with what you said earlier. You've got triggering events on two levels.
Right.
In terms of open space and density that has as its subset the buffer. But if it makes it unequivocally clear by putting that in some language, then why have, if the fact that we're having intelligent people have a discussion about it
Right.
means it's not fully clarified.
Right.
Correct, but as opposed to a modification, what if we just set it as a standard of design that buffer shall match the R1? I mean, what if it was just a standard of design for the RCD? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think it's
Any abutting,
to me, the-
abutting
If
any,
it goes against a different,
there shall be X buffer between
Yeah.
R4 and R1.
I think
As a
that-
standard
that-
of
that's what
design.
we try.
Well, to me, the spirit of the buffer is when there's adjacent properties, to soften that transition from,
Correct.
an
Absolutely
existing
correct.
development to the new development. Now, if it's a standalone development and there's really nothing else that it's transitioning into, then I think it's pretty much a non-issue.
Agreed.
But when there is an existing development that's already there, and now we're putting in an RCD, I think it should be pretty much mandatory that there should be some sort of a transition, and it's got to be either included in the open space in the designated open space, or we can specifically call it out as a buffer.
Well,
Whatever. I don't. 6 1 half dozen the other.
in looking at this, it says an increase in the density, okay, and a reduction in approved open space.
Right.
Okay, I can take this lot over here that was designated as a buffer lot and eliminate it and put it some other place in my development
Right.
and not affect either one of those. I can
Perhaps.
keep my density the same, I can keep my open space the same, but I moved a lot. So instead of 2 lots as a buffer, I now have 1 lot as a buffer.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I think
I'm
we
not
ought,
opposed.
I think
I'm
we
not
ought to put
opposed.
buffer in there.
I'm not opposed
I would
to
ask that
putting it
we
in there.
come up with some language
Yeah.
to suggest.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just thinking, okay, so when they get the preliminary plan approved, they are to follow that when they submit for the final. And so when the final comes to the review board, if it doesn't match pretty much what was approved on the preliminary, that's a reason to discuss potentially not approving that final development plan. Say it matches it to a T, the township approves the final development plan, they start construction, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh wait, we want to go back and change some things, and then they do a switcheroo on a lot in an open space, then does that trigger this? Would that require them to come back to you? And that's the concern.
I would think
right?
so.
Yeah.
And in Canterwood, that's what occurred.
Well, in Canterwood, they didn't even get the final development plan approved first, and they were already asking for changes. So I think with these proposed changes, they wouldn't be allowed to ask for those changes immediately after getting it approved. They could only ask for modifications on the final development plan, not the preliminary plan.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking under Canterwood, which
Right.
is under a current, did they remove the buffer?
Did they remove the buffer?
That was in their preliminary plan.
We saw I don't know how many times we saw.
I mean, you gotta be a little bit more specific, I'm sorry. Where at?
R1 to
Yeah.
R4, there was a buffer, which we saw as a preliminary.
Oh, between the existing they didn't provide one. I remember this, I thought this board asked them to, and they really weren't open to it. They never showed one.
Well, we had one on one side
We
of the
had-
street, but nothing on the other side of the street.
Okay.
Yes.
And I
Okay,
think we
well-
had 2 lots on the left side
Okay,
as I'm coming from.
okay, if that's
Farmwood.
what your recollection, and
Yes.
I apologize, I don't remember
That's okay.
exactly.
Yes, and I was just
There are
using-
no buffers, correct, in
Yeah.
between the
And-
existing R1 and then the PUD. What the trustees did negotiate with them was a larger setback on those lots, but not a strip of land that's part of a buffer per se.
And that's where I think we had I want to call it a conflict, but the trustees made a decision to do that, and we thought on the other way. So
Right.
this is where obviously our thinking has come to want to have final approval. Recommended final approval.
Freudian slip there.
Freudian slip, sorry.
RCD.
But I agree with Hiram too.
Okay.
If we could suggest some language.
Okay.
Okay.
You're paying for it.
Thank you, Hiram.
I think it was
As I said, we're going to
PUD.
take this under consideration in the
Yeah.
next month. We'll have more time to digest. I just wanted to ask under the that was PUD, under the RCD, under 1629 then, Heather, you've stricken,
Yes.
Wait a minute.
could you explain that by striking?
I felt like this was redundant, B and C, because we talk about in part 1 under section 16.1.2 and 1.4, how you get the final development plan approved. We already know, and it's stated already in the first section, that once the preliminary plan is approved, then you start moving forward with the county subdivision review process. But I can look over this with Mike too, just to make sure by potentially deleting this, we're not changing the intent or anything, but, I'll
So I'm-
double check, but and I'll just make sure that we also state elsewhere that we require legal counsel to review the deed restrictions. But I have to tell you, there's no fee established on the fee schedule. We've never charged a developer for legal counsel to review the deed restrictions. So that's
Okay.
something that we've not done.
The reason I ask is because 16 has 2 parts, obviously.
Yes.
And when we strike 1629, doesn't it need to be in part 2, not part 1? You were referring to, well, you struck that because it's in part 1, which is under PUD.
Right, and it says any proposed RCD shall be reviewed and
I'm
approved.
sorry, where are you reading again?
Oh, in 16.29A, it referenced back the procedures in 1612 through 14 of section of part 1.
Okay, I got it. That's why you're striking it, because it refers back to there where we have, thank you, I got it.
But I can-
was just,
well, but that's
I was
something-
just concerned it
yeah.
had to be repeated in part 2, this part refers back to part 1.
And I can go over that with council too,
Okay,
if there's
okay.
any concerns from the council on that.
Okay, my bad. Okay, thank you, Heather.
Okay, you're welcome.
Excuse me. As I said, we're going to further this work, without objection, further this work session to next month, and then have opportunity for us to digest everything that Heather's reviewed with us here, as well as legal counsel review. Any comments or questions relative to Section 16 that we heard tonight? Had good discussion. Okay.
No, I'd
Nothing
like,
else? Okay,
I'd like to discuss.
very good. Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Probably at this time, well, we have another work session item on Section 22, Commercial and Industrial District Uses, and Section 1336, Innovative Site, PD. Again, this, I would ask you, Heather, to overview 22, Table of Uses that we started, I don't think we started discussion on that last month because of time constraints.
Correct. Right. We didn't really get into any of this last month. And what I provided to you, that was part of your August packet, was really just, I printed out some pages directly from the zoning resolution, just for quick reference. So the commission could take a look at what all the conditionally permitted uses are in the commercial and industrial districts as set forth in table 22.03. I know that we've had some concerns and discussions in the last several months regarding potentially some of the uses that are allowed in our capital district and how that fits in with our planning, our comprehensive plans and our town center master plan, and some of the recommendations that were proposed in the master plan, specifically in reference to gas stations and car washes as part of the capital district. And actually, just recently, I'm talking to some real estate agents about the manufacturing piece of property over here on Concord Hampton, just west of the property we were talking about earlier this evening. That's Town Hall neighborhood. I'm sure the commission is aware that building is vacant. I think we might have talked about that at the previous meeting. It's zoned manufacturing. It was used previously basically for offices. And I started talking to some real estate agents about potential buyers and users and things like that. And it really got me looking at, our M district as well, and what is allowed to go in there. So we might want to take a look at that too, because knowing that property is up for sale, someone is going to want to buy that. And do we have the right uses for that manufacturing district as well? I might ask the commission to kind of take a look at that and see if there are any other uses that we allow in some of the even lesser intensive type districts that might work well in that district as well. With the changing of the land uses to the east of that, with residential going up, that's something, a new change too that we would want to consider, as well as if we were to take maybe a closer look at the M district as well. But I didn't have any real strong recommendations for the board at this point, other than possibly eliminating some of the auto-oriented uses under the capital district, or uses that we felt like maybe didn't fit in or per the recommendations of the master plan. But the other part of that is under the capital district, they have that PUD option as a conditional use to move forward with more of a planned development, and that is for the innovative site plan development, where those conditions and permitted uses and conditional uses are listed under section 13.36.
I'm going to ask Heather and the board for some comment. There may be a district and or particular use that is forefront in our mind.
Right.
This exercise, should we consider all of this in 22.
Right.
And all of the varied uses comprehensively, or is there a certain one district, let's say Capital District, for instance, that raised our most recent concern to focus on and then vet that and then move on to and other districts, should they be as manufacturing, as Heather brought up manufacturing and capital,
Right.
should we pick the low-hanging fruit where we feel is the most of concern to the board and to the future of the township, not future, the immediate future, I should say, that we want to help to address more immediately than others. If we undertook all of it, this is going to be quite a undertaking. And so, well, I appreciate, the looking at 22, and I started looking at 22 and all the various uses. It's just, it's overwhelming. My preference would be to pick the capital and now manufacturing to target for discussion amongst the board and movement. Unless we think this is an exercise that the board should do or should do in steps over time, I'll throw that on the table for discussion.
Well, there's now 10, because we just got rid of town hall neighborhood, so that's gone. So we now have 10, right? Why don't we take 2 at a time?
Some are more involved than others.
Well, then we might go down to 1.
That might be the,
Yes.
Well, the biggest thing seems to be over the last months is the capital. That's where all the development's taking place now. That's where the emphasis happens to be by developers and that. I think that would be the one, in my opinion, should be the one that we should concentrate on the most.
We might get a good bang for the buck on that one, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I know the other ones are important too, but to degree, I think right now, we have to, especially when we're moving away from, the big thing we talked about with the township area, we're going to get rid of that right now. So now we don't have to worry about that being developed the way we thought it was going to be designated over the years. Now the focus is back on the capital, which would take care of what we thought would be here. So my opinion is that I think we should concentrate on that.
We could handle special with that. There's not too many items under special, so that might be,
I agree,
that
Hiram.
might be an easy one.
I agree, and also, quite frankly, manufacturing, she brought up, because it's manufacturing. There can't be too many other conditional uses under manufacturing. In fact, I see 2
We
or
could take the single letter ones and
3. Yeah.
manufacturing, special, and capital. I'll bet you we could
Comments?
do those in a-
Yeah, thank you, Herb. Comments? Andy, Rich? Anything, Rich?
no, I
Maybe
just,
suggest
I agree, capital's probably the one we talk most
capital when we
about.
talk most about.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take a significant amount of time, because that district was given quite a few conditional uses. There was quite a few that were there. And I think it does require a significant time and energy just to understand the comprehensive plan and the vision and what was intended for Capital District. Is it still a viable plan going forward for the township? So I might suggest that we concentrate on capital and then decide where to go from after that. and then continue a work session and focus just on the uses in the capital zoning district.
Sounds good to
We're
me.
good with that?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So we'll move forward, Heather, with that, another work session, but concentrate just on the capital district and
Okay.
and the uses therein? Okay.
What's the general, you know, Mike, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Mike, what's the general rule of thumb on whether if it's not included, it's automatically excluded? Is that the way to
That's
look
always
at
been my
it?
position.
Is that the best interpretation of that?
That's always been my position.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make.
The argument comes up, well, it's not prohibited, therefore it's permitted, but that's
Right.
not my position. My position is they've included what they want, in particular regarding uses, and if it's not in there, then it's not permitted,
Right.
either permitted or by conditional
I
use.
just want to know how we err on that. Do we
Yeah.
err on that side if it's not included, then it's.
I won't use the word error, I'll say that's how I construe it.
Right. Okay. Good. Okay. Good.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I can follow up on that. In section 2202D, we actually state that in our resolution, that any use that is not specifically listed as either a permitted use or a conditional use, or that does not meet the requirements for an accessory use, shall be a prohibited use in these zoning districts and shall only be permitted upon an amendment of this resolution and/or the zoning map. So, I guess.
It's in writing.
Yeah, and I just wonder if there are any uses, like new uses that have come up in other areas that would be desirable in Concord that we're not allowing. And some of that I think is based on our definitions. Like I was looking at something the other day, and like, one of the districts we allow outdoor recreation. But it's limited to only like a nonprofit. So I kind of found that odd based on our definition of what outdoor recreation was. It wouldn't allow for, a use that would be profitable.
Really?
So there's things like that and
Well, defer to you, Heather, for recommendations as we go
Yeah,
through this.
okay,
But
and I'll,
let's begin with capital, but
yeah,
that's
I
interesting.
need to keep a tally as these things come
Yeah,
up and bring
it's
them more
interesting.
to you comprehensively. But and the
You
definition.
mean like a bowling alley? Oh, no, you said outdoor.
Outdoor recreation.
Disc-
Like top golf?
So-
Disc golf, that's what I meant to say, top
is-
golf,
Yeah, that's something new, relatively.
outdoor.
Top golf. Like they have in Independence,
So that's not allowed?
Someone was asking me about a driving range,
Which
whether or
is-
not you could do a driving range somewhere, and looking at our zoning resolution, we don't specify driving range in any district. We allow golf courses in some, we don't define golf course. So there's, maybe there's
Interesting.
some easy things too that we need to.
So
kind of work on.
since it's not specifically called out as a driving range, so as either a permitted use or a conditional use, can't happen. That's the rule.
Unless it was part of maybe a golf course and then you look at it as
Right,
an
right,
that would
accessory,
be,
so a standalone driving
That would be an
range.
accessory use.
But if it was
to
just a piece of
permitted
prop-
use of a golf course,
Accessory.
that would be all right.
But if it was just somebody
I
bought a piece of
remember
property and wanted to open a driving range.
we actually did that with
Good
Little
idea.
Mountain.
No.
I remember when we did that with Little Mountain, because they wanted to put a driving range.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't have one, and we had that conversation about it whether it was allowed or not allowed. And I think we put it in as an accessory use.
Yeah.
To
Correct,
the golf,
yeah.
to Little Mountain
Yeah.
Golf Course, so they were able to put that driving, because
Right.
you can see that from the shoreway.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was it. Yeah, I remember that. So, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to review conditional and permitted uses on a regular basis because things change.
Yeah.
There's trends that are going on. There's something that's popular today may not be popular tomorrow, and I think it's a good idea to address those. You never know.
On the golf course in the wintertime, do they allow cross-country skiing? I mean, that's the ideal place to have it.
Some of them do. I
Yeah.
don't know about ours, but some
I
of
was
them
going to say, I Has that ever happened over here by chance? And would that be something we would pop in as recreational?
I don't know.
You got fly over there?
Frisbee golf. Frisbee golf. Big now. It was a frisbee golf?
Yeah,
It's
just-
pretty big now.
Just played it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Thank you, members. I think, well, so if we're in agreement here, we made a decision on Town Hall Neighborhood. We're going to continue the 2 work sessions on 16 and 22. And concentrate, and 22, concentrate on Capital District to begin, looking at all pieces.
A lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So what we have on our agenda for old business, our next meeting is September the 6th, 2022. We'll have the public hearing prior to our meeting on September the 6th. There being any other business, members?
No, sir.
This meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you. Nicely done.
Good meeting, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.